I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zeiss Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Failing Forward episode, where we're going to show you how you can move forward even if someone breaks down laughing in the beginning of your episode.
Waiting for Chad to be making me laughing, and then it's like, oh, we're going to start this train. All right, everyone. Failing Forward is an episode about what happens when things do not go as you and your players planned at the table.
Yes. So let's first start by, as we like to do on this channel, defining the term. What is failing forward? Well, obviously, it's something where you failed, but you're also going to be moving forward. Now, the reason why failing forward is an important concept to take into account in your tabletop RPG game is that, well, in some tabletop RPG games, failing forward is baked into the game's system, and you have to fail forward. Some systems, like, the only results on a check is that, like, you either do it or you do it and also something bad happens, or you do it not as well as you want or with complications, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, many other systems do have a failure state where it's like, okay, you rolled and you tried and you did not do it. Now you haven't done it at that point in time. And so the idea of failing forward that we're going to talk about in this episode is not only going to give you tips that you can use if you're playing a tabletop RPG where you have to fail forward, and that requires some creativity from the GM in most cases, but also we're going to show you how to use the principles of failing forward even in your favorite game system that does not mandate failing forward, and that definitely does have certain types of checks that normally, if you fail, it would just be like, okay, well, you didn't do it then.
Yeah. So, you know, for example, if there's a locked door and then the PCs try to pick the lock and it's like, well, you failed to pick the lock, and then you're like, all right, well, does the adventure end? No, there needs to be some way that you move forward. So sometimes it'll be, you know, with failing forward, it might be more of a, like, a failure is like, you still make it through, but you're kind of scuffed up. Or other times you might be looking for other ways around to solve the fundamental issue.
That's right. And so when you're thinking about failing forward, especially when you're in a system where regular failing usually means that you didn't do it. And Kitsune Warlock says if you don't flail forward, you might hit yourself with the spiked ball from the flail. That's absolutely an issue with flailing forward, or with the misnomered morning stars that are not the real morning stars, but they're the things people think are morning stars that are actually flails.
Absolutely.
So the basic idea is that if you want to use failing forward in your tabletop RPG that normally has regular failures where you just don't do anything, you can set up a situation that is abstracted to the point that it's maybe not just one of a check that has a discrete action on it. And let me give you an example. So, say you have a system where climb on a success means you climb 15 feet, and a critical success is 30 feet. And a failure is you did not climb. That's the example of not doing anything. And maybe critical failures, you fall off the wall.
Yeah.
Now, falling off the wall in the narrative is sort of failing forward, but it also sort of isn't, especially if you have to actually go over the wall to complete the plot. But, like, you fell off the wall, you got hurt, and then you found another way around the wall is a fail forward possibility. But you're stuck on the wall and you have to roll again, definitely is not. So you can abstract the entire wall into an obstacle that you say, okay, you know what? This is a very tall wall. If we're doing it 15 feet at a time, it would take forever. So I just want you to roll one climb check. We know you've got, like, ropes and stuff. If you fell, you wouldn't fall all the way, but you might slam into harsh rocks and have to be grabbed by your allies. So I just want you to roll one climb check.
And if you critically succeed, like, great job. You just made it all to the top.
You made it up to the wall. You made it up so well that you made it up extra fast, and you helped everybody else. If you and maybe that's the critical success. Or depending on how much you want to do things with this failing forward, you could make it so that you need a critical success to have no issues, and even a regular success
is you make
has
it up,
some
you
issues.
Get a little scraped up, you take a small amount of damage, but you're fine. which may be more realistic. Like if it's a really tall wall and you expect like everybody's probably going to fall at least a little bit, you make it up, you get a little scuffed up, it takes a little bit of time, and then the failure is like, okay.
Now you're also fatigued.
Now you're also fatigued.
It took you a lot of extra effort to catch yourself all those times.
And like, you know, the critical failure is like you broke your grappling hook, and or you know, you drew the attention of the guards who are now coming over here, and now that's going to trigger like
you were attacked by harpies while you were climbing the wall because you made so many loud breaking and falling sounds that now there's a special encounter that was added. But the point is, you can come up with a series of increasingly worse things, and if you don't have 4 degrees of success, maybe you're doing this for D&D or whatever, you don't have to make 4. You can make any number of these that you want. The point is that you can create a successively worse set of situations, all of which, if the wall being crossed is necessary to get to the next part of the adventure, involve that wall being ascended eventually.
Yeah.
Right? And if time is sensitive for this adventure because you're racing against the clock in some way, it could also take a different amount of time for each one. And be like, yeah, we had to stop at a plateau partway through and, like, rest and go the next day for this critical failure because it was that slow.
So then, you know, sometimes, I think what this is trying to get at is a lot of times failing forward isn't necessarily that the single check will deliver everything for you. You know, there is, it might close off some avenue, but then, and open up a new avenue, and oftentimes, setting things up well for failing forward is to ask yourself, whenever you present a check to the PCs, if they fail, how does the adventure move forward? Because a lot of times, like, success or failure on something like a single skill check or a single attack roll is like whatever. But if you have like a choke point where it's like, the PCs must make it past this wall, the PCs must acquire this item for the adventure to continue. You know, first of all, you know, you can look at it from the angle of, but do they really have to? Or is there some other thing that they can do? Is there a way the adventure can continue? And there's also the angle of how else could they... Like, do they really have to... If it's the PCs must do task to achieve goal, do they really have to do task to achieve goal, or is there another way to achieve goal? And also, do they really have to achieve goal to continue the adventure?
Right. So, plotting out that flowchart of possibilities is a more macro way of allowing the PCs to not fail forward on a check, but fail forward on the entire plot. That's something that you have to look into when you're working on published adventures. For example, in Jewel of the Indigo Isles, there's a bunch of sections that are like, what if you just failed this part? How did the plot continue?
Yeah, like Rowan mentioned, the society scenario where you critically failed a ritual, but that just meant the feature encounter was more difficult.
Absolutely.
Society adventures are really very much lean into the simpler failing forwards, where like the consequences aren't necessarily as dire because of the fact that they don't have as much space to branch off into complicated if-thens. They kind of have to bring you back along the path. Whereas if you're doing something for a home group, then you can, like, the society adventure generally has when you look at the question of like must do task to achieve goal, it's going to ask the question like, you know, do you really have to do task, or is there another way to achieve goal? But it's not going to ask the question, do you really have to achieve goal?
Exactly. Whereas your own home game, you can have an infinitely branching fractal path that every single one of those paths is unique. And after each session, you figure out which paths the PCs took and just write new ideas or brainstorm new possibilities that are only based on the results that you know that the PCs took.
But that's really complicated, too. When Numbat's mentioning here, Numbat's scenario wrote so that if they missed the checks, they took extra time and that had consequences. Yeah. That's one of the most classic ways to do it is, you know, something becomes more difficult. Maybe an option that was like the best case scenario is closed off, but other types of success are possible. Maybe you have like a negative condition that you have, like Mark mentioned, fatigued, or you're clumsy, or you have some other thing going on.
The alertness of the guards
is higher. You miss out on an opportunity to gain an ally or a treasure or something that may have helped you. The opponents have had a chance to consolidate, so there's a harder encounter. The opponents have a chance to ambush you. The opponents have a chance to put on their armor. You know, maybe somebody escapes the location and you can't necessarily confront them here, but you can confront some of their lieutenants, and you can still gather some information because they can't completely escape.
Maybe you had
time to set off a complex hazard.
Maybe you had like a meta points for like style or technique points of like doing things with panache that could impress an NPC or gain you a special result where it's like, wow, these guys think that you're the best because you made so many successes, whereas if you fail forward and you lose a bunch of those style points, you still did it, but very sort of brute force, and they're like, well, I don't know if this group is that interesting to us.
Kitsune has a very specific example here. Sometimes you find the secret passageway to skip an encounter, only to forget about it and run back into the encounter during the fight and fight 2 encounters.
Yay!
Yeah. That definitely can happen. So, one of these things too with failing forward is that a lot of times I think when people talk about failing forward, they consider it to be like that the failure is like the direct failure. Like there's a check, there's a DC, and you fail that DC, and therefore this particular path doesn't.
That's kind of the basic.
That's kind of the basic type, but it is also related, even though this isn't like failure exactly, but to the idea where like the GM has ideas for like how the PCs might achieve a certain key goal, and the players are just like, I'm not sure how to do that, so we're just gonna like try this thing that isn't gonna work, and then they get stuck. It's like, okay, yeah, you have this idea for there's this adventure, and like in order to get this area, maybe you're thinking they might do a heist because they need to break in, and the PCs are like, well, it's too dangerous to break into that area, so like, what do we do?
Right. And so failing forward means that whenever the PCs are trying something, let's say they're doing a subsystem, and you come up with multiple results depending on how well they get in their infiltration points or their influence points or their research points. Failing forward means that when you branch that out and figure out, okay, I have it if they get 20 plus or 15 to 20, 10 to 15, 5 to 10, or below 5. Every single one of those, if you want to fail forward, should move the plot forward in a different way that gets increasingly worse.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to move it, even if it's your home game and it's not like a Pathfinder Society. It doesn't even have to be remotely the same way. Maybe if the research points less than 5, they didn't get any of what they needed to correctly chase down the BBEG's secret weaknesses, but instead they wound up exposing themselves to the BBEG when they're trying to research it.
And then the BBEG is going to decide to take action against
them. And now there's a new plot line
yes.
that is much more negative for the PCs, but does move to the next plot line.
I did want to loop back to sort of like why I was thinking of those two as similar, is the idea that, a lot of times failing forward is about how do you respond to avenues being closed off,
yes.
and they could be closed off because the PCs failed to check, or they could be closed off because the players are not interested in taking that particular route. Or they'll
assume that it won't work.
Or they assume it won't work, and they're like, oh, so whether it's my character wouldn't do that, or like, maybe, and this definitely often happens with GMs getting frustrated by like, well, I'm expecting them to break into the manor and do this thing, but the problem is that you as the GM may know, okay, well, the guards here aren't really that difficult, they can handle it, but to the players, it's like, wow, you've done too good of a job building up how difficult this is. And the players are like, well, we have no reason to know that this thing would be something that's within our bounds.
Yeah, we don't want to try against the guards, for example. So failing forwards also means that your plot lines, when your hooks just do not catch, you need a way to fail forward past the failed dangling of the plot hook.
Yeah. And part of it, too, is... making sure, first of all, that you and the players have compatible goals for where the story's going. Because, if you're trying to get the players to challenge the Great Dungeon, and the players don't want to challenge the Great Dungeon, then, trying to get them to go do the dungeon isn't failing forward. That's like trying to get them to do the thing.
There's almost no way to fail forward past the situation where you have not established a session 0 and nobody knows what they're doing, and your definition of success is different than the PC's by a dramatic way.
Yeah.
Because forward is a term that we're pretending when we define this is objective, but it can be subjective what failing forward it means.
Because forward generally more means like the story progresses and people are having a good time. You have some kind of an arc and people are enjoying it.
I mean, they may not be having a good time. but at least the story progresses.
Yeah.
It continues. It doesn't get stuck.
It
doesn't stay stagnant.
Like
it doesn't stonewall.
I mean, I guess that's a worthwhile thing to bring up too. Is like, people sometimes will enjoy their characters failing, but other times people will feel frustrated because they had a plan that they wanted to pull off and that plan didn't work. And so, there is some frustration inherent in it, but when you're failing forward effectively, at least you're not spending a lot of time mired in the failure aspect of it. You're spending more time moving on to like the okay, and now what? Understanding
your player psychology is key to failing forward successfully, whether that's in a system that requires failing forward or one that doesn't always encourage it, like D&D. Pathfinder 2 says to do it in like a sidebar, but it doesn't always give you a lot of tools for that. You need to know what your players will consider to be like sort of a fair price of failure. If you let them fail forward and some of the failure conditions are too lax, even like more stereotypically, it's if they're too harsh, people will be like, that was really mean. You let me keep going forward after I failed the check, but my entire lower torso got cut off. What is even the point of this? But that's more stereotypical. The players don't like it when it's too mean. But even for some groups, if it's too lax, they could feel like you've drained away all the tension because it's like, all right, well, the BBG is doing a ritual to destroy the entire city. It's like, okay, well, don't worry, because we're running out of time, but the archer has just enough time to make a shot, and we could shoot the ruby out of his hand. And, I rolled a natural 1. Oh, do you have a hero point? Nope. Nah, critical fail. Okay, well, you know what? Yeah, it still hits him and disrupts the ritual, but you're clumsy 1 for a round.
Yeah, like, doesn't feel appropriate. So I guess, like...
And then they might be like, what? Like, where was the tension? Like, that was the worst result I could get. I got a natural 1, and I'm clumsy 1 for a round, and I hit, like... So you can actually have a situation, and maybe your group actually is okay with that. Maybe it's like, clumsy 1, I hate having negative conditions. This was truly a natural 1. Like, that's why you have to know your group. I think for most groups who play Pathfinder or D&D, that giving, like, some minor negative condition for a round would not feel like it balances on the scale with, like, letting you disrupt the ritual.
And that's also why, like, a lot of the things in society for these negative conditions, they tend to be scaled so that it's like, okay, you'll have a negative condition for the next encounter based on, like, some minor skill thing or whatever. So you want to set the stakes and make sure that, like, if you present like what the stakes are to the players, that like that worst case scenario is actually possible, or if something is going to intervene, it's going to be something that makes sense, and then they're like, oh damn, it's like, they failed, and so like, someone else did like a ridiculous last ditch thing, and like there were huge consequences, so like the city didn't entirely get destroyed, but like, the Sacred Guardian Order did some kind of last-ditch thing, and they were all destroyed, and, like, this major relic was messed up, and it's like, okay,
Yeah, so you could have something where it was just like, okay, we said that this shot is the only thing that could stop it, but I changed my mind, and, like, the NPCs did it, but these bad things happened. If you want to make the shot and the -1 do something, you can be like, okay, so you rolled a 1. So it's not like you almost hit the ruby. You missed the ruby completely. You hit the ritual circle in one of the spots that the wizard said not to hit.
Yes.
They said you need to hit the ruby, the energy source, and take that out and carefully stop the city destroying ritual. You hit the ritual circle. The wizard said we can't predict what that's going to do, so you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
The city winds up, it's not going to get destroyed because you did hit the ritual circle. But it chaotically sent all of you into some weird realm that you don't know where you are. And the BBEG is like drawing in the energy like from the ritual into themselves, which is like transforming them into some kind of powerful like ritual boosted up like minor godling type figure over time. If you can't escape from this weird like mindscape that is based on the BBEG's like memories and the souls and other sacrifices that were made to create this ritual and get there, then the BBG might accidentally ascend into like demigodhood off of this ritual, a ritual that wants to destroy the city
Yeah.
and become this destructive ruination being.
So
this
it's like
is
maybe-
way worse.
Yeah.
But
Because then the BBG can just ransack the city at that point and also be a demigod.
yes. And you'd be like, okay, so this is actually probably worse in a lot of ways, but we have a chance to stop it.
Yes. So in that case, it's not a. In that case, it's an escalation of the stakes.
Yes.
But there's an opportunity to fix it. But like you were saying before, the situation's getting worse and worse. It's going to be harder and harder to climb out of that.
We raised the stakes, but we've also put a double or nothing bet on the table.
Yes.
Essentially. Maybe more than double or nothing.
And I would say, like, with the Sacred Order of Defenders would do this, then it's better off if you set it up so it's like, man, we really like the Sacred Order of Defenders, and they have this bunker where they're going to protect a lot of people so that, like, the city will, they have these kinds of things, and we don't want this bad thing to happen, and so the PCs are like, yeah, we want to take care of this because we don't want this other thing to happen.
It's
and
also easier to make the fail forward with the Sacred Order of Defenders if you've previously established that the Sacred Order of Defenders
has a plan, and the PCs
had
are
a
like,
plan
no,
to stop the ritual that was going to
do
destroy them, and the PCs are like, no, we can stop it.
Yeah.
Then when you miss with the natural one on the arrow, it's like, well, of course the Sacred Order of Defenders did it. They told us they were going to do it. Whereas,
and it doesn't feel like a cop-out.
Whereas if you told them, no, you're the last hope, we all put our stakes on this, everyone's buffed you up, we gave you a thing so you'll be more accurate, and now you're gonna shoot. Oh, I rolled a natural one. Like, oh, but don't worry, the Sacred Order of Defenders. Like, it feels less like you were just coming up with it suddenly. If it was very well established, the pieces are like, no, we don't want you all to die. You're our friends. We've been doing 3 campaign adventures and like this whole arc with the Sacred Order of Defenders. Yeah, we can't just let you do that. But then they have to, and they've really lost something for it. Yeah. So there's many different ways to set it up, including ones like maybe you didn't think of the natural one in advance with the, they messed up the ritual circle, and you had to come up with that one on the fly because the situation that led to only the archer having a shot was unexpected, and then them rolling a natural one.
Because the players were, rolling tons of natural ones, and you expected them to do better in a combat before, but everyone else is down at this point except for the archer because shenanigans.
And so there's some things that you can set up in advance and some things for failing forward that you can just kind of come up with when the situation arises. And you need to know your players to know which one of those will work. Maybe with your players, having the Deus Ex Machina NPCs that weren't set up in advance won't bother them at all. Maybe they'll be fine with that. Some groups, they won't. Some of those groups would be different than the groups that we upset with the clumsy one as being too little of a penalty for the situation. And so what you need to do is get a sense, and your players might not know that in advance without either a example of having done it or giving them a hypothetical like that and be like, hey, so, and then you give some ideas or even bounce off them, be like, what would you think if this was happening and you got that? What would you think would be a fair thing to do on the natural one? And you can give some examples. Yeah. And be like, clumsy one, and maybe all of them are, of course not. And then be like, do any of you have an idea? And they'd be like, well, maybe this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're stuck, you can talk to them and be like, I'm thinking among these, like, what the kind of things might seem like it could be fair.
Be like, maybe my archer missed with the arrow, but still had action left, and so just rushed over and, like, threw herself at the evil caster and the ruby, and both of them, like, winked out in a flash of red and never to be seen again. For now, unless they re-arise one or like together in an amalgamated creature that is like has one head of the archer and one of the caster, and they hate each other or something as a later BBG. Like, and if the archer player or if the person suggests that, then you get a sense of what kind of drama they like. Yeah. Right. And in this moment, maybe they wouldn't have suggested that if that was a real situation. But if you're giving this to them as a hypothetical, it gives them an easier way to give an example of what they would like. And you can extrapolate from that to figure out what kind of sort of fail forwards you want to use with them later on. And people in chat are talking about Pathfinder Society being a good way to learn more about these kind of things.
But it can also be tough if you like don't know how to get past it. Yeah.
Yes. And that you wasted the hero point that could have been used on the arrow on a diplomacy check to befriend Boblin the Goblin back in the tavern.
A reckless group wound up splitting up together information, then all winding up in jail. Bailed out to condition the help or release on an information exchange. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like having another NPC who comes in and is like a, I can help you, but type situation where it's like, all right, this is how we're going to get out of the situation, but there is going to be some kind of a price. We're going to need to pay in money or information or like doing a particular task or, this is going to strengthen this NPC's position, which could be a problem for us later or could cause issues with some of our other alliances.
That's right. So one way to help yourself if you want to be a heavily fail-forward campaign is to make sure you have a variety of meta currencies, both carrots and sticks, that are being tracked at any given time that you can use as sort of like a default fail-forward cost. To give you an example of this, if you were literally running an infiltration, then awareness is a meta currency. You could be like, okay, yes, but the awareness went up. That's an easy one, right? But if you have things like this, of things that can go down or up, bad things that can go up, or good things that can go down, if you failed forward, or maybe to make it feel more positive, a good thing that goes up on an actual success but doesn't go up on the failures, and things that you know the PCs want or wouldn't want for the negative ones, then you can use that to just be like, oh, if I can't think of anything else, I'll just make the fail forward be related to that.
Kojo has a question about writing society scenarios. When people are writing them, are they thinking like GMs to build and fail forward into scenarios? The writing guidelines absolutely do mention putting fail forward into scenarios, as well as that's something that developers are trained to do, I say from first-hand experience.
Yes,
having been a developer who was trained to do that and having trained lots of folks to specifically do that, yes.
That is something Linda is uniquely positioned to say that she definitely would have looked for.
Absolutely. Well, from Under Ice, the original Pathfinder 1 scenario, 618, was one of the first ones that I worked on. And so that was a great introduction to failing forward for me, because that was a scenario that had a lot of branches of like, you could do this, and that if that works, you can do this, and try to talk it out, and if not, you have to fight, and if you don't do that, you go over here. And Emma points out, like, it certainly helps to play it in GM adventures, society adventures, before writing them. And I think that's true for any kind of adventure, that it helps to play in GM before starting to think about what other GMs are going to need when they're reading an adventure. Because, when you're doing a published adventure, you need to think not just about, like, what would your specific group do, but also how might other people respond to this. So, one of the things that I definitely think about for this, and this is relevant to failing forward too, is, try it whenever you have a challenge. Try to think of like several different skills that could be used to apply it. Even if it's a basic like skill check, it's like, okay, well, maybe the most obvious way to get past this is, is like a thievery check to like disable this, but could you use athletics to just push your way through? Could you use like crafting to try to understand the mechanism or something like that? So there's that, and then there's also sort of like the another one to think about is sort of the direct versus the sideways. I kind of think about it in terms of the like the fight, stealth, or talk approaches, where are you trying to, or do you run in through the front door? Do you try to like sneak your way around and come into things in a clever way, or are you trying to like use and talk? I kind of find and you're gonna try to like talk your way and use social things, and other approaches can kind of fall under this, like stealth. Maybe you're not 100% sneaking, but you're also like using illusions to create a diversion or something like that. But
absolutely. So I remember the for Under Ice flowchart that Linda made, because the adventure already had a lot of possible options, and it was well plotted out. But Linda drew an entire flowchart of every choice the PCs could make, and and it was exactly relevant to failing forward, because she found a few permutations in the initial formulation that didn't fail forward.
It was possible to get stuck.
It's possible to get permanently stuck if you did some very obscure combinations.
Yeah, and like this, I recommend to you guys, because this was me as a new developer, and I was looking at it, and I'm like, I cannot possibly keep track of everything that's going on here. But I tried to do, like, what are the main points that you're expected to get to, and once you do this, so it was like, okay, you know, meeting with the guards, and then it's like, talk or fight, and if you talk, then, like, you know, succeed or fail, and there were some points where it's like, talk, fail. The adventure doesn't say what happens, it just stalls out, you lose. So it's like, okay, does talk, fail go into fight?
And Linda kept that flowchart, and I know this because Linda said she trained a few people. Linda trained a huge percentage of the people, even that are currently Paizo, like developers and designers across multiple teams.
Yes.
And I heard from one who was someone that Linda trained, who then was working under me after that, and was we were talking about something similar for an adventure. They're like, don't worry, Linda showed me about that with flowcharts, and I really learned a lot from that, and talked about the Fronderized flowchart. So I know that a lot of people at Paizo are using those techniques even right now in order to solve these kind of failing forward problems. So Koja says, so Linda is the Leshy Queen and the Scenario Queen. Well, she was also known as the Over Leshy due to her like being the Over Leshy of organized play and narrative. So she was both the Leshy Queen and the Over Leshy.
6, maybe?
What?
I'm trying to at least 6 people. How many people have I like talked to about this?
Yeah, I don't.
You've
trained a lot of people. I don't know how many you specifically told that, but you have
at least 6.
At least 6.
Yes.
And you've trained more than 6. Just maybe you didn't tell all of them about that. So there you go. It's a lot, okay?
Yes.
Linda was counting it up. So basically, TLDW, summarizing this. Some game systems always make you fail for it, and you're gonna have to learn this skill or sink. In D&D and Pathfinder, some of the checks that you make have a failure that's like, oh, nothing happened. But you could turn it into failing forward by sort of putting it together into the narrative of what's happening instead of just running a simple check of, oh yeah, I'm just balancing on this. I either moved forward or I didn't, or maybe I fell on my butt. But instead putting it into a more meta-narrative approach of, yeah, I was bouncing and maybe I fell on my butt, but also people were watching me and I looked like a fool when I fell on my butt and I lost style points.
Yeah.
But I've made it across because obviously if I keep rolling this check, I'll make it across this.
Yeah. So I think to summarize some of the things we're talking about is when you have a check, consider the stakes of that check sort of with itself, as well as, you know, what are the stakes of, you know, and if that check is something you could just completely bumble up, then what is the other way that we move around it if we need to achieve that? What is the way we move around that task if we fail that task to achieve the same goal? Or what is the way that we move past that goal to continue the adventure?
Exactly. And that's the bottom line. Because you can always come up with, it might take some time to develop it as a skill. You have to work with your players to know what works for them. It doesn't feel like cheating them out of any kind of tension. But you can always come up with a hierarchy of better and worse versions of moving forward in the plot.
Because one of the things about like when things feel too harsh, then players might be like, this doesn't really fit with like my idea of this character, because like my character is like a complete master of performance, and you know the way that you described that they messed up is like that they just like didn't know how to do anything. So I think that you know, when you're describing those failures, that's something to keep in mind too. It's not necessarily like okay, everybody obviously is going to have like bad days or brain farts or whatever else, but you don't want them to be like, seriously, like that level of messing up is not even within the range of something that should happen to my character. Like, my character is not going to like forget which way is up or like that sort of thing.
Sometimes when you think of the negative consequences for failing forward, you can think of them as being something else that was an element that was related to it. So for instance, Linda was talking about, what if you were trying to stage a performance to have the evil dictator get lambasted at your performance so that you could use it as a distraction to like do some other thing, right? So maybe if you critically failed, that means that the evil dictator is angered at when you lambasted her, and she is not fooled by the distraction and just attacks you. And so now you're just fighting her directly instead of doing the thing you were trying to distract her for.
So that doesn't mean like you failed and like maybe you still got like a 20, you're higher level, you still got a 25 on your thing or whatever. So like that doesn't mean that your 25 is suddenly like, worse than like,
doesn't mean your performance was garbage.
Yeah.
Just that it rubbed her the wrong way, and you gave enough too many tells out that she was able to figure out was a trick.
Because by setting the DC really high, there's something that you're saying about that task that is very challenging, and so like failing by a ton should feel like messing up more than failing by a little. And critical success versus success definitely captures that in part too. But like it should feel different if like Ayla the fighter is like, oh, I'm not trained in performance and I'm gonna get up on the stage and I roll a 1 versus like, if Lem the Bard gets up on the stage and rolls a 1,
Exactly. So maybe the critical success is the dictator is really distracted and you do the mission. The success is the dictator is somewhat distracted and you do the mission. Failure is actually they weren't that distracted and you do the mission, but like they may have some traps and schemes for you because they catch on pretty quickly. And critical failure is they're so pissed off and it's so obvious to them that you were doing this that they just attack you right there. And you don't get to go to the mission, but you're instead engaged in a more direct fight with the dictator, which is disadvantageous because you can't get the stuff you were trying to nab from their mansion.
Yeah. And, the players, like I said before, the players might be frustrated that their character failed still, or like be like, oh man, that doesn't really quite fit. But if you kind of make sure that the way that you describe it is within the bounds of something that feels reasonable for that character. So like if they're a character that's great at something, they're not going to be like worse than a beginner.
Exactly.
When they mess up.
Kojo says, just like the show must go on, the adventure must go forward. Yes. And for a homebrewed adventure, forward can mean going into the great wide yonder somewhere that you never expected to go. It just means not sticking in the same place.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if your PCs are in jail, right? And they're like, okay, we're in a jail cell. And it's clear if we wait it out, we're going to be executed. So it's like, all right, well, we'll try to break out. But if failing to break out just means they're still in the jail cell, and they fail to break out again, they're still in the jail cell. And they fail to break out again, and they're still in the jail cell. And then, like, what are you going to do at that point? Does eventually, like, Luca come and get you out of the jail cell? And you're like, oh, okay, I guess now we can fight together against a robot dragon on the bridge? I don't know.
That's another example of something that isn't, like, great failing forward. When you fail forward is you just keep retrying it over and over again.
Well, that is actually, in fact, not failing forward.
Yeah, it's not failing forward.
That is failing not
circular.
forward.
Yeah,
That is not any kind of failing forward. That is what happens when you don't do failing forward.
Yeah, that's failing. Well, when I think of not failing forward, I tend to think of the opposite of it more being like, you fail to check, scenario grinds to a screeching halt. Whereas, you fail to check, keep trying until you succeed, will eventually escape the loop, but it's also like, why are you even rolling in that point?
Yes.
It's much better at that point to be like, you fail to check, and so, okay, eventually you succeed, but there's some consequence.
The guards are on higher alert, there's more enemies, there's an extra robot dragon on the bridge.
Rather than just being like, keep rolling until you succeed, because that's a waste of time.
That's right. It's a waste of time. It's bad if you're not going to let them succeed again, and now they're stuck in the jail cell, and it's like, well, that's the end, and then you got executed. It's bad if you are going to let them keep rolling until they succeed, and there's no consequences. You might as well just skip to them succeeding, and the failure or critical failure means a worse situation for them during the breakout.
Yeah, like Tempo One's saying is like if players know that you're just wasting their time at that point when you're like, oh wait, no, try again. Oh wait, no, try again.
Oh, now you rolled high. Okay, you did it.
Yeah, so like you can do that if there is potentially room for that if you're like, okay. Yeah, you have a tracker or whatever, and you can try once per day to break out, and each day that it takes you, then, like, more bad stuff happens. But it is, it's often good to just, like, if you can have it be the one check that determines the full result, or at least, like, a small number of checks that you're working with. Like how, this is one of the things from Society 2, where it would be like, you're navigating an area, and the area has, like, some diseases in it or whatever, and you don't want to be like, okay, every hour did I get a disease, every hour did I get a heat stroke, every hour did I get whatever. So a lot of times in society, particularly in this was in first edition Pathfinder that we were doing this, we would be like, okay, instead of rolling a ton of easy checks until you mess it up, it's better to roll like one much harder check and then have like a scale of results where it's like critical failure. Okay, now you really have an issue. Like failure, you have a bit of an issue. Success, you have like a tiny inconvenience, and critical success, you're just like,
Kitsune Warlock said, you said every hour did I get a disease. Is this being live streamed from Gen Con?
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe next time.
Something, wash your hands, use hand sanitizer, wear a mask.
There you go. So that's where we're at with Failing Forward. Hopefully you can use this to make Failing Forward a big part of your Pathfinder and D&D games and any other system that doesn't include it normally. Again, Pathfinder 2 in the Coming Up with Improvised Rulings section does say to GMs, it does directly say to try to use Fail Forward. It just doesn't give a huge, long example of how to do it.
There is one more thing that I wanted to mention here in this episode that's improv focused. Is there anyone in chat who has like a situation they're in with their game that they're just like, oh my gosh, how do I get out of this? Or like a hypothetical that they've been pondering over?
Well, I don't know. There might be.
There might be. So if you do, please do feel free to put that in the chat.
Sure thing. What will we talk about while we're waiting to see if anybody has
Only
something
adult scheduling conflicts.
Just those. Yeah, you can't fail forward from those.
You cannot fail forward from those. You just have to be like, maybe next week. And but it does help to put out the call earlier in the week, or to like try to schedule things farther forward than 1 week if you can, and be like, all right, when might we be available, or to consider flexibility in your days potentially, to see when things might work out. Or to see if you can have multiple groups within a larger group, if you have a sufficiently large group, to say, okay, we have this one game that has only 4 players who are the ones who can come most of the time, so we can start this one for when they can come.
That makes sense. So, let's see. It looks like people generally did not have a question about their own situation with Failing Forward.
He missed the question. It was just only adult scheduling conflicts. I took that seriously and provided some thoughts on that.
Yep. All right.
Usual GM, when you GM, both tend to do a lot less checks and a lot more narrating or question asking.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of like the how do you approach these sorts of things. Yeah, if you have a situation and you can't handle a failure, then don't make a check.
Yep. And if there is no reason that they would fail because it's just easy enough, you also don't have to
sort of the
check.
Example of like, characters don't need to like,
check to see if they trip because their shoes were untied.
Exactly.
Yep.
You don't need to check to breathe.
All right. So, everyone, let's say goodbye to YouTube. Bye, YouTube.
Bye.